I had just dropped my wife off at the airport for what I thought was a routine business trip. But as I pulled out of the departure lane, my 8-year-old son, sitting in the passenger seat, suddenly grabbed my arm. His hands were shaking violently. His face was dripping with sweat. He whispered words that made my blood run cold. "Dad, we cannot go home tonight." I heard Mom planning something bad for us. I did not ignore him. I killed the headlights and hid our car in the trees near our house. 10 minutes later, the iron gates opened, and what I saw destroyed my entire world. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe a father should do whatever it takes to protect his child. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and I have spent my entire life building a logistics and construction empire from the ground up here in Columbus, Ohio. For decades, I fought tooth and nail in boardrooms and on construction sites, turning dust and gravel into an $85 million legacy. But I was about to learn that the most dangerous predators do not wear hard hats or rival company suits. Sometimes they sleep in your bed. I married Valerie 6 years ago. She was 42, beautiful, charming, and seemed to breathe new life into my weary bones. When my little boy Leo was born, I thought my life was perfectly complete. A late-in-life blessing. But about 6 months ago, I suffered what my doctors called a minor transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke. It forced me to step back. I handed the day-to-day operations of my company to Victor Montgomery, my hand-picked chief financial officer, a man I trusted like a younger brother. And I handed my daily care, my meals and my medications to my loving wife. It was a crisp Thursday evening. I had just driven Valerie to John Glenn Columbus International Airport. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit smelling of expensive jasmine perfume. She leaned over the center console, kissed my cheek softly, and smiled with those perfectly painted lips. "I am going to miss you both so much," she purred, brushing a hand through Leo's hair. "It is just 3 days in Chicago for the commercial real estate seminar. You boys be good. And Harrison, darling, do not forget to take that blue blood pressure pill the doctor prescribed. You know how your heart gets when you overwork yourself." I smiled, feeling that familiar sluggish fog in my head that I had been battling for months, and promised her I would take it. I watched her wheel her designer suitcase through the sliding glass doors of the terminal. I felt like a lucky man, a man well cared for. How utterly foolish I was. The drive back to our $4 million estate in the suburbs was quiet. Too quiet. Leo had always been a timid, observant boy, but lately he had become a ghost in his own home. He barely spoke, jumping at sudden noises, spending hours drawing alone in his room. I chalked it up to a phase, maybe anxiety from seeing me sick. We were cruising down the dark, tree-lined roads. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the cabin. I reached over to turn on the radio, but suddenly Leo unbuckled his seatbelt. He lunged across the console and grabbed the steering wheel with a terrifying, desperate grip. The heavy SUV swerved. I slammed on the brakes, pulling hard to the shoulder, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Leo, what are you doing?" I gasped, putting the car in park. I looked over at my son. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, he looked like a terrified animal. His chest heaved. Sweat poured down his pale face. He was hyperventilating, his tiny fingers digging into my forearm like claws. "Dad, please." He choked out, tears spilling over his cheeks. "We cannot go home tonight. Please, Dad. Do not take us home." I tried to soothe him, reaching out to wipe his tears. "Buddy, hey, it is okay. Mom is just gone for a few days. We are going to order pizza, watch movies. Just you and me." He violently shook his head. His fingernails dug deeper into my skin. "No. No, Dad, you do not understand." I heard her. I heard Mom talking on the phone in the garage yesterday. I heard her planning something bad for us. She said tonight was the night. We cannot go there. Any other man might have dismissed it as an 8-year-old having a nightmare. or an overactive imagination. But 40 years in the ruthless world of construction contracts and cutthroat logistics had given me a sixth sense, a primal radar that kept me alive when rivals tried to bury me. You do not survive long in my business if you ignore your gut. And right then, looking into my son's terrified eyes, my gut screamed that he was telling the truth. I did not ask questions. I did not try to rationalize it. I shifted the car back into drive, but I did not head toward the main entrance of our estate. About half a mile down the road from our property, there was a dense, overgrown pine grove that bordered a service access road. I turned off my headlights, plunging the car into complete darkness, and eased the heavy vehicle off the pavement. I hid us deep within the thick wall of trees. We had a clear line of sight to the massive wrought iron gates of my driveway, but from the road we were completely invisible. We sat there in the heavy silence. I turned off the engine. The only sound was Leo's ragged breathing and the wind rushing through the pine needles. Minutes dragged by like hours. I kept telling myself I was being a paranoid old fool. My wife was halfway to Chicago by now. The house was empty. But I held Leo close to my chest, feeling his tiny heart racing against mine. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I was just about to start the car and tell Leo it was all a bad dream when a flash of light swept across the wet asphalt. I froze. A sleek black Mercedes sedan glided silently down our quiet residential street. It did not slow down to look for an address. It moved with the confidence of someone who had been there 100 times. The car pulled up directly in front of my massive iron gates. I waited for the driver to punch in the security code at the keypad. But they did not reach out the window. Instead, the gates automatically began to swing inward. Someone inside the house had opened them remotely. The Mercedes pulled onto the circular cobblestone driveway and stopped right in front of the grand mahogany double doors. The engine cut off. The driver's side door opened. Under the harsh glare of the security floodlights, I recognized him instantly. It was Victor Montgomery, my chief financial officer, the man I had entrusted with the keys to my $85 million kingdom. He was dressed in a sharp, dark suit, looking around the property with a relaxed, arrogant swagger, but he was not alone. The passenger door opened, and another man stepped out. He was tall, gaunt, and completely unfamiliar to me. He wore a gray trench coat and carried a heavy metallic aluminum case. It was the kind you see medical professionals or paramedics carry for specialized equipment. My breath hitched in my throat. I instinctively put my hand over Leo's mouth to keep him from making a sound, though the boy was already holding his breath, burying his face into my jacket. Then the heavy mahogany front door of my house opened. The warm yellow light from the foyer spilled out onto the front steps. Standing there bathed in the light was Valerie, my beautiful, loving wife who was supposed to be waiting at a departure gate at the airport right now. She was not wearing her navy pantsuit anymore. She was wearing a sheer crimson silk robe. She stepped out into the chilly night air, completely unbothered by the cold. She walked straight up to Victor Montgomery, threw her arms around his neck, and kissed him. It was not a greeting. It was a deep, passionate, hungry kiss of a woman claiming her lover. Victor wrapped his hands around her waist, laughing at something she whispered in his ear. Then Valerie turned to the strange man with the medical case, gave him a curt nod, and ushered both of them inside my house. The heavy wooden door closed shut, sealing them inside. I sat there, in the pitch-black cabin of my SUV, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The world I thought I knew simply shattered like cheap glass. The loving wife, the loyal financial director, the business trip. All of it was a meticulously crafted lie. And waiting inside that house with a strange man holding a medical case was a trap designed specifically for me. I looked down at the empty plastic cup sitting in my cup holder, the one I used to take my daily medication. I thought about that blue blood pressure pill Valerie was always so desperately eager for me to swallow. I realized then that my recent health issues, the brain fog, the weakness might not be natural at all. They were waiting for me to come home. They were waiting for me to take my medicine. And my 8-year-old son, shivering in my arms, was the only reason I was not walking right into my own grave. I did not turn the key in the ignition. I did not drive to the police. Not yet. Because when you realize the people closest to you are trying to destroy you, you do not just run. You learn exactly what they are doing, and then you burn their entire world to ashes. Trust is the foundation of any family, but blind trust is an open invitation for profound betrayal. When you spend your entire life building an empire and providing for those you love, you must never ignore the quiet, persistent alarms of your own intuition. The greatest threat to your life rarely breaks through the front door. Instead, it often smiles at you from across the dinner table. True strength is not just about accumulating wealth. It is having the ruthless, unyielding courage to face the ugly truth, to protect the innocent, and to rebuild everything from scratch. After I dropped my wife off at the airport for her business trip, my 8-year-old son whispered, "Dad, we cannot go home tonight. I heard Mom planning something bad for us, so we hid in the trees." 10 minutes later, I froze when I saw who opened our front door. I kept the headlights off until we were miles away from the estate, navigating the winding roads of Columbus by the glow of the moon. My chest was tight, an ache radiating down my left arm, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. Beside me, Leo had finally stopped crying. The exhaustion of sheer terror pulled him into a restless sleep against the passenger door. I reached over, gently resting my hand on his small shoulder. I needed to get him somewhere safe, completely disconnected from the life I had built. I bypassed the luxury downtown hotels. I drove to a nondescript motel off Interstate 71 that asked no questions. I paid for 2 nights in cash, ushering my son into a room that smelled faintly of stale smoke and cleaning chemicals. The moment the deadbolt clicked, I pulled my smartphone from my jacket pocket and powered it down entirely. Monica had insisted on installing a tracking app a few months ago, claiming it gave her peace of mind, given my recent health scares. That tracking app was now a leash, and I was cutting it. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, watching Leo breathe in the dim light, filtering through the blinds. The silence of the room was deafening, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of the hour. My mind raced back to Trent Lawson, my chief financial officer, and the gaunt man holding the medical case. A profound, terrifying clarity began to wash over me. The mini-stroke I had suffered 6 months ago. The lingering brain fog. The sudden physical weakness that forced me to hand the reins of my company to Trent and my daily care to my wife. It was not the natural decline of a 70-year-old man. It was orchestrated. I did not sleep a single minute. I sat by the window, piecing together the timeline of my physical collapse, waiting for the sun to rise. When the clock finally flashed 8 in the morning, I knew it was time to play my part. I needed her to believe her perfect lethal plan was safely in motion. I powered my phone back on. Automated emails flooded the screen, but no missed calls from my wife. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression into an oblivious husband, and dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Good morning, darling." Her voice floated through the speaker, sweet and melodic. The sound made my stomach physically churn. I could hear the faint sounds of city traffic and a siren in the background. It was a brilliant touch, an artificial soundscape designed to mimic the bustling streets of Chicago. "Good morning, sweetheart," I replied, forcing my voice to sound raspy and tired how she expected me to sound. "Did you make it to the hotel safely?" "Yes, I just got settled in," she sighed, the picture of an exhausted professional. "The flight was bumpy and this seminar is dreadfully boring. How are my favorite boys doing? Did you and Leo sleep well?" "We slept just fine." I lied smoothly, watching my son stir under the motel blanket. "We are having a quiet morning. I am making some coffee now." "That is wonderful, honey," she cooed, her tone shifting into that of a devoted caregiver. "Please tell me you remembered to take your medication this morning. You know how worried Dr. Keller gets when you skip a dose. Did you take the blue blood pressure pill on your nightstand?" The mention of the blue pill felt like a physical blow. Dr. Keller was the private physician she had enthusiastically recommended after my hospital stay. She had insisted on managing my daily pill organizer herself, claiming it was her way of showing love. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding back a surge of pure rage. "Yes, Monica, I took it right after I woke up. I feel fine. Do not worry about me." "Good," she said, and I could almost hear the triumphant smile spreading across her face. "I just want you to be healthy, Harrison. You know you mean the world to me. Now I need to get ready for the opening keynote speech. Is there anything else you need before I head down to the conference center?" I leaned back against the motel window, my mind sharp and calculating. It was time to test the waters to see just how deep her deception ran. "Actually, there is one minor thing," I said, keeping my tone entirely casual. "The security company sent me an automated alert early this morning. It looks like the main gate sensor was tripped late last night, right around midnight. I was going to call the patrol guards to check the perimeter, but I figured I would ask you first. Did you forget to lock it before you left for the airport?" There was a pause on the line. It lasted no more than 2 seconds, but to a man who spent 40 years negotiating contracts, that hesitation spoke volumes. It was the sound of a liar rapidly recalculating her script. Oh, that she laughed lightly, a flawless display of dismissive charm. "I am so sorry, honey. I should have texted you. It was just Trent." I realized halfway to the airport that I had left a crucial tax dossier in the foyer. I needed it for my meetings today, so I called Trent and asked him to swing by the house to grab it and courier it to my hotel. He must have triggered the sensor when he was leaving. It is nothing to worry about. I hummed in agreement, playing the role of the easily satisfied old man. "Ah, that makes perfect sense. I will ignore the alert then. Focus on your seminar. Have a great day, dear." "Love you, Harrison," she said softly. "Love you too," I replied and ended the call. I slowly lowered the phone, the silence of the motel room rushing back in to fill the space. Her lie was smooth, beautifully delivered, and absolutely fatal. Trent Lawson was my chief financial officer. He oversaw a digital infrastructure managing $85 million in assets. Every tax document and financial record was stored on an encrypted cloud server. Trent had clearance to access all that data from his phone. There was no logical reason for him to physically drive to my estate at midnight for a paper dossier. It was a panicked cover story explaining his presence at the gates. Monica made no mention of the other man. She omitted the stranger carrying the aluminum medical case. I paced the room connecting the dots. A corrupt doctor, a cheating wife, and a man creeping into my home. They were managing my decline. I looked at Leo slowly waking up. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I watched my son push the tangled hotel blankets aside. He walked over to the small desk in the corner, pulled a handful of hotel crayons from a glass, and found a stack of stationery. I stayed seated on the mattress, watching him with a heavy ache in my chest. He was so small, so incredibly fragile in this dingy space that felt a million miles away from the luxurious life I had built for him. I walked up quietly behind him. I expected to see a drawing of a car, or perhaps a cartoon superhero. What I saw made the blood freeze in my veins. Leo was pressing a black crayon into the paper with such force that the paper was beginning to tear. The message was unmistakably terrifying. There was a stick figure of a man lying on a rectangular bed. Standing over the man was a female figure with long, dark hair, holding a massive needle pointed directly at the sleeping man's arm. To the right of the bed, drawn with frantic, harsh strokes of red and black, was a smaller stick figure of a child. The child was completely enclosed in a grid of thick black lines, a cage. My breathing stopped. I knelt beside my son, forcing my voice to remain steady so I would not frighten him further. "Buddy, what are you drawing?" I asked softly. Leo did not look up. His eyes remained locked on the paper as he swapped the black crayon for a red one coloring the tip of the needle. "It is what Mom is going to do," he whispered, his voice completely hollow, devoid of any childlike innocence. "She said she needs you to go to sleep for a long time so Trent can be the boss." and she said if I tell you she will lock me away where no one will ever hear me cry again. The crayon snapped in his little hand. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. A horrifying, agonizing realization crashed over my entire being like a freezing, relentless tidal wave. Just 6 months ago, I was a robust man of absolute iron health. I was aggressively running a multi-million-dollar logistics empire, actively managing massive construction sites across 3 different states, and playing competitive tennis on the weekends. Then came the crippling headaches, blurred vision, and finally, the collapse in my home office. The doctors at the hospital were baffled initially, but then Monica brought in Dr. Keller, a private concierge physician who quickly diagnosed it as a transient ischemic attack. A mini stroke, he called it. He prescribed a strict regimen of rest and new medications. Monica took absolute control of my recovery. She insisted on organizing my pill dispensers every single Sunday. She brought me my water and my pills every morning and every night, watching me swallow them, with eyes full of what I thought was wifely devotion. And because I was weak, because my mind felt like it was wrapped in a thick fog, I handed the day-to-day operations of my company over to Trent Lawson. I gave him the keys to the kingdom, trusting him to protect my legacy, while my loving wife protected my health. They had orchestrated the entire thing. The stroke was not a failure of my body. It was a chemical assault. They were poisoning me right under my own roof, wearing masks of profound concern, while they stripped me of my mind and my company. My hands balled into fists so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. I felt a lethal protective rage ignite within my soul. They dared to threaten my child. They dared to look into the eyes of an 8-year-old boy and promise him a life inside a cage. I told Leo to pack his crayons. We needed to move, but first I needed physical proof. I called Victor, my former head of corporate security, a man who had taken a bullet for me 10 years ago and whose loyalty was forged in steel. Within an hour, Victor arrived at the motel. I handed him my son, instructing him to take Leo to a secure safe house out of state and to trust absolutely no one. Once Leo was safely driving away with Victor, I borrowed Victor's unassuming sedan and drove back toward my neighborhood. The morning sun was bright, mocking the dark reality of my life. I parked 3 blocks away from my estate, walking through the wooded trail that bordered the back of my property. I knew this land better than anyone. When I built the house 15 years ago, I insisted on a discreet contractor entrance through the lower basement level, bypassing the main security grid for maintenance crews. Monica did not even know it existed, and Trent certainly had no idea. I keyed in the old manual override code. The heavy steel door clicked open with a quiet hiss. I stepped into the cool, dark basement of my own home, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. I moved silently up the carpeted stairs, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs. The house was immaculately silent, smelling of expensive floral diffusers and polished hardwood. I navigated the familiar hallways, stepping only on the edges of the floorboards to avoid any creaks. I reached the master bedroom. The massive king-sized bed was perfectly made, sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains. I walked over to my nightstand. There it was. The small crystal glass of water, and resting beside it on a folded linen napkin was the little plastic cup containing my morning doses. Among the harmless vitamins and joint supplements sat the blue pill. It was small, chalky, and completely unassuming. I picked it up between my thumb and forefinger. Just looking at it brought back a phantom sensation, a faint, bitter, metallic taste on the back of my tongue that I had been waking up with for half a year. The taste of my own slow execution. I pulled a small plastic evidence bag from my jacket pocket, slipped the blue pill inside, and sealed it tight. I did not touch anything else in the room. I left the water glass exactly as it was. I wanted Monica to return from her romantic rendezvous with Trent and find the pill missing, assuming the clueless old man had obediently swallowed his daily dose of poison. I needed them comfortable. I needed them completely arrogant and secure in their grand illusion. I slipped back down the hallway, retreating into the shadows of the basement, and exited through the heavy steel door. I walked back through the dense pine trees to Victor's sedan, the plastic bag burning a hole in my pocket. The crushing grief of a broken marriage was entirely gone now, replaced by a cold, calculating drive to survive. I slowly started the heavy engine firmly gripping the steering wheel and began heading toward the open highway. My next and most crucial stop was the only place that could objectively tell me exactly how my treacherous wife was systematically trying to murder me right now. I drove back to the motel just as the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the Columbus skyline in bruised shades of purple and gray. The plastic evidence bag burned against my chest, tucked safely inside my inner jacket pocket. Every mile I covered felt like crossing enemy lines. When I opened the door to our dingy room, Leo was sitting, exactly where I had left him, staring at the muted television with blank, exhausted eyes. I knelt in front of him, forced a reassuring smile I did not feel, and promised him that everything was going to be fine. A few minutes later, there was a heavy, rhythmic knock on the door. 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones. It was the signal I had established with Victor years ago. I opened the door to find the hulking frame of my former head of corporate security. Victor was a man carved from granite, a decorated veteran who ran my details during overseas expansions. He took one look at my pale face and the trembling boy clutching my pant leg, and his expression hardened into professional steel. I handed him a duffel bag containing the belongings of my son, along with a thick envelope of emergency cash. I told Victor to take Leo to a heavily guarded safe house across state lines. I instructed him to disable location services, use burner phones, and trust absolutely no one, not even local law enforcement. Victor nodded once, a silent vow that he would burn the world down before letting anyone touch my child. I hugged Leo tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, promising I would come for him soon. Watching Victor lead my son to his armored sedan was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. With my boy finally safe, the father could step back, and the ruthless businessman could take over. My destination was a highly specialized independent toxicology laboratory located 2 hours north of the city. I chose this facility because it was completely unaffiliated with the massive healthcare conglomerate that employed Dr. Keller. I could not risk handing this pill over to a clinic where Monica or her corrupt physician might have leverage. The drive up the interstate was a masterclass in focused rage. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel as I replayed the last 6 months of my life. Every instance of forgetfulness, every sudden bout of fatigue, every time I stumbled in a board meeting, while Trent watched with feigned concern. I had surrendered my pride and my empire because I believed my body was failing me. Instead, I had been systematically poisoned by the woman who slept next to me every night. The betrayal was profound, but I refused to let grief take hold. I only had time to fight. The laboratory was a stark modern glass building nestled in a quiet corporate park. I walked through the sliding automatic doors, my boots echoing on the polished concrete floor. The reception area was sterile and bright-smelling of antiseptic and cold coffee. A young woman in a crisp white lab coat looked up from her computer, offering a polite smile. I approached the front desk, retrieving the plastic Ziploc bag from my pocket, and placed it flat on the pristine white counter. I did not give her my real name. I used an alias I maintained for discreet real estate acquisitions. I told the receptionist I needed a comprehensive, expedited chemical analysis of the pill inside the bag. I demanded a rush order, making it clear cost was not an issue. When she mentioned their standard protocols took several days. I pulled a thick wad of $100 bills from my wallet and laid them deliberately on the counter. Money has a universal language. She began typing rapidly, logging the sample into their priority system. But as I stood there watching her print the barcode labels, something went terribly wrong. It started as a faint hollow ringing in my ears. At first I thought it was just exhaustion from staying awake all night. But then the sterile white lights of the reception area seemed to suddenly flare, becoming blindingly bright. The smooth concrete floor beneath my feet felt as though it were pitching sideways, like the deck of a cargo ship caught in a violent storm. I reached out, slamming my palm flat against the reception counter to steady myself. My breath hitched. A heavy, suffocating weight pressed down on my chest, radiating down my left arm. And then came the taste. A sharp, bitter, unmistakable metallic taste flooded the back of my throat. It was the exact same foul, chemical copper flavor that had coated my tongue on the afternoon of my supposed mini-stroke 6 months ago. The same paralyzing numbness began to creep up the back of my neck, turning my muscles to lead. A horrifying realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The poison was not just in the pill sitting on the counter. It was already running through my veins. Monica had given me my evening dosage right before we left for the airport. The neuroinhibitor was actively attacking my nervous system right at this very moment. The receptionist looked up from her keyboard, her eyes widening in alarm as she saw my face drain of all color. She asked if I was all right, her voice sounding distorted and miles away, as if I were underwater. She reached for the telephone, offering to call for an ambulance. I knew that if she called paramedics, they would take me to a hospital. They would log my real identity. Monica would be notified as my medical proxy, and Dr. Keller would swoop in to finish the job. I would be locked in a hospital bed, entirely at their mercy. I refused to let them win. I refused to let my body surrender to poison. Drawing on every ounce of stubborn, ruthless willpower I had cultivated over a 70-year lifetime, I locked my knees and forced myself to stand upright. I squeezed my eyes shut, taking a ragged, agonizing breath, fighting through the thick chemical fog invading my brain. I opened my eyes, staring down the dizzying spin of the bright room. I managed to shake my heavy head, forcing my tight vocal cords to work. I told the young woman that I was perfectly fine, claiming it was just a sudden drop in blood sugar from skipping breakfast. I handed her a secure burner cell phone number, explicitly instructing her to call me the absolute second the toxicology results were finalized. I turned around and slowly walked toward the exit. Every single step felt like dragging a massive boulder chained to my ankles. My vision blurred terribly at the edges, the world narrowing into a dark tunnel, but I kept moving forward. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stumbled out into the cold, crisp morning air. I reached my car, slumped heavily into the driver's seat, and locked the doors, dripping with freezing cold sweat, determined to survive this and defeat the monsters who caused it. I navigated the sprawling highway interchanges, fighting the heavy, lingering lethargy pulling at my limbs. I drove to the industrial district on the south side of Columbus, far away from the polished glass and manicured lawns of my corporate headquarters. My destination was a dilapidated brick storage warehouse I had purchased 3 decades ago. It was an off-the-grid asset held under a dummy corporation, completely invisible to my chief financial officer, Trent Lawson. I pulled my SUV into the rusted loading bay, cut the engine, and waited. 5 minutes later, a modest sedan rolled into the shadows beside me. Mitchell Reynolds stepped out. He was my personal attorney, a man whose loyalty had been tested and proven over 40 years of legal battles. Mitchell was sharp, methodical, and arguably the most dangerous corporate lawyer in the state. He took one look at my pale, sweating face and rushed over to the driver's side door. He asked if we needed to go to a hospital immediately. I shook my head, gripping his shoulder to steady myself as I stepped out of the vehicle. I told him that hospitals were compromised, that my wife and my trusted financial director were actively trying to murder me, and that we had a massive corporate hemorrhage to stop before the sun went down. Mitchell did not ask frivolous questions. He simply nodded, his eyes hardening into twin chips of flint. We walked into the dusty, windowless office at the back of the warehouse. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a highly secure, encrypted laptop that bypassed our main company servers. Trent had undoubtedly locked down my administrative privileges over the past 6 months, operating under the guise of protecting me while I recovered from my supposed stroke. But I was the founding architect of this empire. I had master override codes buried deep within the foundational source code of our accounting software, codes that only Mitchell and I knew existed. We sat at a splintered wooden desk beneath a single flickering fluorescent bulb. Mitchell connected to a secure mobile hotspot and began typing sequences of alphanumeric passwords. The screen illuminated the dim room, casting long shadows against the exposed brick. We bypassed Trent's elaborate digital barricades and initiated a comprehensive shadow audit of the corporate ledgers. What I saw on that screen was a masterpiece of financial deception. It was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly devastating. Trent had not simply stolen money. He had meticulously orchestrated a sophisticated, untraceable corporate bleed. We pulled up the financial records from the exact week I suffered my first neurological collapse. The timeline was a perfect, horrifying match. The very day I was admitted to the intensive care unit, Trent had initiated a series of aggressive restructuring protocols. He had authorized massive capital transfers, funneling company revenue out of our primary holding accounts. Mitchell's fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the digital paper trail. The money was being aggressively routed into a complex web of anonymous limited liability companies registered in Delaware. These phantom corporations had no physical addresses, no legitimate employees, and absolutely no public record of ownership. Trent had classified these massive outflows as logistics consulting fees, equipment leasing contracts, and overseas expansion expenditures. The sheer scale of the theft was breathtaking. In just 6 short months, while I was trapped in my own home, heavily sedated by a woman claiming to love me, Trent Lawson had stolen exactly $15 million from my life's work. $15 million vanished into the shadows of the banking system. I stared at the glowing spreadsheet, feeling a profound, terrifying void open up inside my chest. This was not just a violation of corporate trust. This was a systematic, deeply personal dismantling of my entire existence. They were draining my wealth to fund the new life they planned to build over my grave. Mitchell looked at me, his face pale with shock. He asked if we should immediately alert the federal authorities and freeze all operations. He warned me that if this continued, the entire $85 million trust could be wiped out by the end of the fiscal quarter. I raised my hand, silencing him. There was absolutely no time to mourn the betrayal. There was no time to feel sorry for myself or lament the years I had wasted trusting these vipers. If we alerted the authorities right now, Trent would instantly know he had been discovered. He would panic, empty the remaining accounts, and disappear to a country without an extradition treaty before the federal agents could even draft a warrant. We needed to be smarter, colder, and infinitely more calculating. I told Mitchell we were not going to freeze the accounts. Instead, we were going to set a lethal trap. I instructed him to program silent, invisible digital tripwires deep within the banking mainframe. We established an automated security protocol that would silently monitor every single penny in the $85 million master trust. If Trent attempted to move a single dollar above his standard payroll authorization, the tripwire would trigger. The entire corporate network would instantly and irrevocably lock down. All accounts would freeze, all access portals would crash, and an encrypted alert would be sent directly to my private phone. Trent would be trapped inside a burning building with no exit. Mitchell worked feverishly for 2 solid hours, coding the security measures with ruthless precision. He routed the emergency alerts through a decentralized server to ensure Trent could never intercept them. Every keystroke was a defensive wall built around my legacy and my son's future. When he finally hit the enter key to confirm the protocol, a small green confirmation light flashed on the screen. The trap was set. The remaining fortune was secured in an impenetrable digital vault that only my fingerprint could open. I closed the heavy laptop, plunging the small windowless room back into dim, cold shadows. I felt a tremendous crushing wave of physical exhaustion threatening to pull me under, but the fierce, righteous adrenaline pumping through my veins kept me anchored firmly to reality. Mitchell packed his electronic equipment quickly, promising me he would remain entirely off the grid and on high alert until I gave the final signal to strike. He asked me what my next immediate move would be. I told him I had to return to the viper's nest. I had to go back to my sprawling suburban estate, look my treacherous wife directly in the eye, and flawlessly play the role of the frail, dying old man she fully expected to see. I had to let her truly believe she was winning, let her grow arrogant and sloppy while I patiently waited for the toxicology report to confirm the final piece of their murderous puzzle. I walked back out to my SUV, deeply breathing in the dusty, heavy industrial air. The war had officially begun, and I was absolutely going to finish it. I got behind the steering wheel, started the engine, and drove away from the warehouse, preparing my mind for the ultimate performance of my entire life. I would not fail my son. I would survive this nightmare. The drive back to my sprawling estate in the Columbus suburbs was the longest journey of my life. Every turn of the steering wheel required a monumental effort. The chemical fog Monica had so meticulously built inside my brain was fighting me, pulling at my consciousness, demanding that I surrender to the exhaustion. But the image of my terrified 8-year-old son shivering in the passenger seat of my car just hours ago served as an impenetrable shield against the fatigue. I gripped the leather tightly, focusing on the road ahead. I had to become an actor on a stage where the cost of a single slipped line was my life and my child's future. When I finally pulled through the towering iron gates of my property, the afternoon sun was casting long, elegant shadows across the manicured lawns. The house looked like a magazine cover, a perfect monument to my lifelong success. It was a fortress I had built to protect my family, but it had secretly become my prison. I parked the vehicle in the massive garage, taking a moment to simply breathe in the heavy silence. I stepped out of the car carrying the weight of a dying man, exactly as my treacherous wife would expect. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door and stepped into the grand foyer. The air was still smelling faintly of the expensive jasmine perfume Monica always wore. It was the scent of a predator. I walked through the lavish living room, intentionally dragging my left foot, slightly practicing the pathetic shuffle of a man whose body was giving up. I needed the security cameras, the ones Monica had undoubtedly installed, to monitor my decline, to see exactly what they wanted to see. I moved to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and let my hand tremble violently enough to spill a few drops on the marble countertop. I wiped it up with a slow, clumsy motion. Every action was a calculated performance. I made my way to the study, sinking heavily into my leather armchair. I placed the cheap prepaid burner phone on the mahogany desk right in front of me. Mitchell had secured it for me earlier. It was untraceable, a phantom lifeline to the truth. I sat there in the quiet house, watching the digital clock on the desk tick forward minute by minute. The waiting was a unique kind of torture. My mind raced through 1,000 dark scenarios, but nothing could have truly prepared me for the sheer clinical evil of the reality. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the burner phone broke the silence. The harsh, synthetic ringtone echoed sharply in the large room. I reached out my hand, steady now, and answered the call. "Mr. Caldwell," a voice said on the other end. It was the lead toxicologist from the independent laboratory I had visited that morning. His tone was strictly professional, but there was a distinct undercurrent of deep concern bleeding through his words. "I have the expedited results from the sample you provided. I need to ask you directly, sir. Has someone been administering this to you under the guise of cardiovascular medication?" I closed my eyes, feeling a cold, heavy knot tighten in the pit of my stomach. "Yes," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "I was told it was a specialized prescription for my blood pressure. What exactly is it?" The scientist let out a heavy breath. "Sir, the pill you gave us contains absolutely no blood pressure medication. It is a highly potent, custom compounded cocktail of drugs. The primary active ingredient is a heavy, strictly controlled neuroinhibitor. It is laced with a staggering concentration of benzodiazepines. This is not something you get from a standard pharmacy. This is a synthetic compound designed to aggressively suppress central nervous system function." I sat perfectly still, absorbing the clinical terminology, as if listening to a judge read my death sentence. What does it do to the human body? I asked quietly. If taken daily, the toxicologist explained, it systematically shuts down cognitive pathways. It destroys short-term memory, retention, induces severe muscle lethargy, and severely impacts speech centers in the brain. It is designed to perfectly mimic the aggressive rapid onset of severe dementia. The muscle relaxants are dosed high enough to cause localized paralysis, effectively simulating a series of ongoing strokes. If you have been taking this regularly, it is a miracle you are still walking and talking. You need to go to an emergency room immediately and contact law enforcement. I thanked him for his profound diligence, assured him I was handling the situation with my attorneys, and ended the call. I placed the burner phone gently back onto the desk. The room felt freezing cold, despite the afternoon sun pouring through the large windows. The puzzle pieces rapidly snapped into a horrifying, brilliant picture. Monica and Trent were not trying to kill me. Murder was too messy, too easily investigated by suspicious life insurance actuaries and skeptical police detectives. A sudden death would instantly freeze the corporate assets and lock my entire $85 million fortune in a lengthy probate process. Trent would lose his access, and Monica would be subjected to endless legal scrutiny. They did not want me dead. They wanted me alive but entirely erased. They were actively, methodically destroying my brain to force me into a permanent state of undeniable legal incompetence. Once the neuroinhibitor completely ravaged my motor skills and cognitive function, Monica would parade me in front of her corrupt physician, Dr. Keller. He would officially diagnose me with advanced, irreversible dementia. Monica, playing the tragic, devoted wife, would immediately file for full medical and legal conservatorship. With a comprehensive power of attorney document, she and Trent would gain absolute, unquestioned control over every single penny I had ever earned. They could legally drain the $85 million master trust, sell the commercial real estate, and liquidate the company assets without anyone raising a single question. I would be locked away in a pristine medical facility, a prisoner trapped inside a failing body, fully aware of my destruction, but utterly incapable of speaking a single word to stop it. They would strip my empire bare while I drooled in a wheelchair. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of their strategy was almost impossible to comprehend. I had spent decades fighting corporate raiders who wanted my company, but none of them possessed the demonic malice of the woman I had married. She had kissed my cheek, smiled into my eyes, and handed me my daily dose of neurological poison. I stood up from the heavy leather armchair, feeling a terrifying, absolute calm wash over my wounded soul. The trembling in my hands was completely gone, replaced by steady strength. The thick chemical fog in my mind burned away rapidly, incinerated by a singular blinding focus. I looked around the room, acknowledging every piece of art, every book, and every award I had earned through my own relentless sweat and blood. I was not just going to stop them. I was going to meticulously architect their absolute, utter ruin. The moment the heavy realization settled into my bones, the trembling in my hands vanished completely. I picked up the burner phone once more and dialed Victor. He answered on the first ring. I told him the absolute truth about the blue pill, about the systematic poisoning, and about the grand lethal illusion Monica and Trent were spinning behind my back. Victor was silent for a long moment, a silence heavier and more terrifying than any words could ever convey. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, dangerous rumble that promised absolute vengeance. He asked exactly what I needed. I told him I needed hidden eyes and listening ears in every single dark shadow of my massive estate, and I needed them flawlessly installed before my wife's return flight landed tomorrow afternoon. Victor promised to immediately assemble a ghost team elite specialists who handled corporate espionage and off-the-grid black ops surveillance. They arrived just past midnight. A nondescript, heavily modified utility van rolled quietly down my long, winding driveway, its headlights completely extinguished to deliberately avoid alerting any nosy neighbors. 4 men dressed in tactical matte black stepped out carrying heavy specialized electronic equipment cases. They moved with the silent, terrifying efficiency of a highly trained military unit. Victor introduced them simply as his absolute best operators. I gave them unrestricted access to the fortress I had built. The complex operation was a flawless masterclass in technological precision. For the next 5 agonizing hours, my beautiful home was meticulously rigged to become a total, inescapable surveillance net. They started in the central nervous system of the house, skillfully threading long fiber optic cables through the intricate network of the HVAC ventilation shafts. Microscopic cameras, genuinely no larger than a grain of rice, were deeply embedded into the pristine white ceiling grills. They offered wide-angle, crystal-clear, high-definition views of the grand foyer, the sprawling living room, and the sweeping marble staircase. I watched closely as one of the technicians crawled completely beneath my heavy mahogany office desk, the very desk where I had foolishly signed the legal documents, giving Trent temporary control of my lucrative company. He secured a highly sensitive state-of-the-art audio bug directly against the underside of the thick wood, capable of effortlessly picking up a muffled whisper from entirely across the large room. The most agonizing part of the night was watching them work inside the master bedroom. That private room was a sacred sanctuary that had been terribly violated by a woman who desperately wanted me entirely brain-dead. They carefully installed a tiny invisible lens inside the decorative casing of the bedside lamp, pointing directly facing the exact spot where Monica faithfully left my daily dose of neurological poison. They strategically placed another powerful audio transmitter securely behind the ornate wooden headboard. Every single microscopic camera and hidden microphone was expertly hardwired to completely bypass the home's main wireless internet network, making them completely invisible to any standard electronic sweep. The constant live feeds were safely routed through an external, heavily encrypted offshore server and streamed directly to a specially modified, untraceable iPad Victor handed me. I tapped the smooth screen, watching 12 different high-resolution angles of my own home vividly spring to life in absolute real time. The captured audio was phenomenally crystal clear. I could easily hear the faint rhythmic hum of the large refrigerator in the kitchen, while standing perfectly still in the distant study. The ghost team quickly packed their heavy gear, leaving absolutely no physical trace of their nocturnal presence. The thin layer of dust was completely undisturbed, the heavy furniture perfectly aligned. They vanished into the pre-dawn darkness just as silently as they had magically arrived. With the digital trap flawlessly set, I drove Victor's sedan back out to the rural safe house where my son was hiding. The sun was fully up now, casting a bright light on the Ohio countryside. I found Leo sitting at a small kitchen table eating cereal under the watchful eye of one of Victor's trusted associates. When Leo saw me, he dropped his spoon and ran into my arms. I held him tight, feeling the rapid beat of his small heart against my chest. I knelt to his eye level, looking directly into his frightened face. I told him that I knew exactly what Mom and Trent were doing. I told him that they were bad people who had told him terrible lies, but that I was stronger than them. I needed him to be brave. I explained that we were going to go back home and we were going to play a very important game. He had to pretend that everything was perfectly normal. He could not say a single word about the crayons, the motel, or the safe house. He was to act exactly like a happy, oblivious 8-year-old boy whose mother had just returned from a boring business trip. Leo swallowed hard, his small hands gripping my shoulders tightly. He asked if I was going to be safe. I looked him in the eye and promised him that nobody was ever going to hurt us again. We got into my SUV and made the long drive back to the estate, preparing to face the enemy. We pulled through those iron gates just past noon. The house looked exactly as it always did, a sprawling monument to my hard work. But now it was heavily weaponized. I ushered Leo inside, instructing him to go straight to the playroom and start building his favorite building block sets. I went directly to the master bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, carefully preparing my physical demeanor. I needed to look incredibly tired, slightly confused, and desperately dependent. I practiced the slight slump of my tired shoulders, the vacant stare, the violent trembling of my left hand. It was sickening to assume the posture of a dying victim, but it was the perfect camouflage. I walked into the study, sitting heavily into my comfortable leather armchair. I pulled the encrypted iPad from the secret hidden compartment drawer inside my desk and activated the bright screen. The 12 high-definition camera feeds glowed, capturing every angle. The house was completely quiet, patiently waiting for the cold-blooded predator to return to the empty nest. Monica's return flight from Chicago was specifically scheduled to land at 1 o'clock. Trent was supposed to pick her up from the busy airport curb, maintaining the grand illusion of the helpful corporate executive assisting the devoted, exhausted wife. I sat completely alone in the heavy silence of my study, intently watching the live digital feed of the grand foyer. I was no longer the frail, failing old man they arrogantly thought they were manipulating so easily. I was the calculated architect of their impending destruction. The complex chessboard was flawlessly set. The final pieces were aggressively moving into place, and I confidently held every single tactical advantage. I leaned back into the soft leather chair, consciously slowing my breathing, and silently waiting for the heavy mahogany front door to finally open to welcome the traitors. The mahogany door clicked. Monica stepped into the foyer. "Harrison, darling." "I am home," she echoed. Her artificial warmth made my stomach turn. I remained in my armchair, taking a deep breath to bury the corporate fighter and summon the broken old man. I let my shoulders slump forward, loosened my jaw, and forced a tremor into my left hand. I pushed myself up, shuffling my feet, dragging my left leg with every step. I navigated the corridor as Monica dropped her travel bag. She looked radiant, her cheeks flushed with the lingering glow of her affair with my chief financial officer. When she saw me, her mask of wifely devotion snapped into place. Her face softened into tragic concern. "Oh, my sweet husband," she cooed, wrapping her arms around my neck. "You look incredibly tired." I inhaled her perfume, fighting the urge to push her away, and weakly raised my arms. "I slept all right," I murmured, keeping my voice raspy. "I just feel foggy today, Monica. My head feels heavy." She framed my face with her hands. "Dr. Keller said you would have bad days, Harrison. Come into the kitchen. Let me make you tea." She linked her arm through mine. Every step was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I leaned heavily against her, projecting utter dependency. In the kitchen, Monica guided me to a bar stool, patting my shoulder, before turning to the stove. She filled the kettle, chatting about the fictional seminars she supposedly attended in Chicago. I sat playing a man struggling to follow a conversation. "I need some water," I muttered. I slid off the bar stool, intentionally making my movements clumsy. I walked to the cabinets, grabbing a ceramic coffee mug. I looked at Monica. As her eyes met mine, I deliberately relaxed my grip. The ceramic mug slipped, striking the floor with a crash, shattering into pieces. I gasped, taking a clumsy step backward, feigning shock and confusion. I stared down at the broken pieces, raising my shaking hands. "Oh no, I am so sorry," I stammered, my voice cracking perfectly. "I do not know what happened. My hand just let go." Monica rushed to my side, her face a portrait of maternal pity. "Shh, Harrison. It is completely fine," she whispered gently, grabbing my trembling wrists and lowering my hands. "It is just a silly old mug. Do not upset yourself over this. You are just having a weak moment. You just sit back down before you cut yourself." I allowed her to guide me back to the bar stool. I sat heavily, burying my face in my hands, projecting the picture of a deteriorating old man losing his grip on reality. I peeked through my fingers, watching her gracefully sweep up the ceramic shards. It was time to push the illusion even further. "Monica," I mumbled. "Did Travis call today? He was supposed to send me the logistics reports." Monica paused her sweeping. She stood up, looking at me with intense calculation. "Who is Travis Honey?" she asked softly. "You know," I replied, waving my hand vaguely in the air. "Travis, the finance boy, The one who runs the money. Her eyes gleamed with a cold, triumphant light. She slowly walked over to me, placing a comforting hand on my knee. Do you mean Trent, sweetheart? Trent Lawson, your chief financial officer. I blinked slowly, furrowing my brow in exaggerated confusion. Trent. Yes, Trent. That is what I said. Why did I say Travis? My mind is just so muddled today. It is okay, my love, she said, her voice purring with satisfaction. Trent has everything completely under control at the office. You do not need to worry. You just focus on resting your mind. Now go lay down in your study. I will bring your tea and your afternoon medication in a few minutes. I nodded meekly, sliding off the stool. Thank you, Monica. I do not know what I would do without you. I shuffled out of the kitchen, maintaining my broken posture until I was safely out of her sightline. The moment I crossed the threshold into the hallway, the frail, trembling old man vanished. My spine straightened, my jaw locked, and my steps became completely silent and predatory. I slipped into the dark study, quietly closing the heavy oak doors and locking them securely. I moved swiftly to my desk, my heart pounding with fierce anticipation. I reached into the hidden compartment, pulling out the encrypted iPad. I activated the screen, tapping on the live high-definition feed from the microscopic camera hidden in the kitchen ventilation shaft. The screen brightened, showing Monica standing exactly where I had left her. But the soothing, devoted wife was completely gone. The mask had fallen, revealing the monster underneath. She was standing over the kitchen island, staring in the direction of the hallway, with a smile of pure malice stretching across her face. It was a look of absolute intoxicating victory. She believed she had won. She genuinely believed my brain was successfully rotting away. I watched closely as she quickly reached into her tailored suit jacket and pulled out her smartphone. Her manicured fingers flew across the digital keyboard with frantic, excited energy. The hidden audio bug planted beneath the kitchen cabinets picked up the soft, rhythmic clicking of her typing. She was texting Trent. I did not need to see the screen to know exactly what she was writing. She was gleefully reporting my devastating cognitive decline. She was telling her lover that the poison was working perfectly, that the mighty Harrison was nothing more than a stammering, pathetic shell of a man who could not even remember his own executive's name. Stomaching the sheer indignity of playing a helpless victim in my own home was a bitter, jagged pill to swallow. I wanted to throw the heavy oak doors open, march back into that kitchen, and wrap my hands around her treacherous throat. I wanted to scream the truth, to tear her artificial world to shreds right then and there. My muscles physically ached with the primal urge to confront her, to demand answers for the unforgivable betrayal. But I remained frozen in my leather chair, gripping the edges of the iPad until my knuckles turned completely white. I forcefully choked down the burning rage, letting it settle deep in my chest to fuel my resolve. Confronting her now would be a catastrophic tactical error. She would panic, call her lawyers, and weave a new web of brilliant lies. I needed her to take the final irreversible step. I needed her and Trent to initiate the legal transfer of my estate based on my supposed incompetence. I needed the ultimate, undeniable proof of their conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted murder. So I sat in the shadows of my study, watching the woman I once loved plot my demise, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to execute my vengeance. I remained in my study until the clock flashed 10 in the evening. I heard Monica humming a cheerful melody while she loaded the dishwasher. It was the terrifying soundtrack of a woman plotting murder in her own home. I waited until the house fell quiet. I pushed myself up, maintaining the shuffling gait of a broken man. I dragged my feet across the carpet, navigating the dark hallway, and slipped into the guest bedroom at the end of the floor. It was a space for visitors who never came. I locked the oak door with a silent click and retreated into the shadows. I sat on the mattress, pulling the encrypted iPad from my jacket. The screen cast a ghostly light across my face as I tapped the application. The 12 camera feeds materialized. The house was a fortress, but the true enemy was already inside its walls. The hours dragged on with agonizing slowness. I watched the timestamp in the corner of the screen tick toward midnight. My body ached with a profound exhaustion, but my mind was sharper than it had been in decades. The chemical fog had dissipated, replaced by a cold clarity. At 12 minutes past midnight, the motion sensor on the exterior basement entrance triggered a silent alert on my screen. My pulse quickened. The contractor door slowly creaked open. Two figures stepped into the dimly lit corridor. I recognized the arrogant stride immediately. It was Trent Lawson, my chief financial officer, the man I trusted to protect my corporate legacy. Trailing closely behind him was a tall, gaunt man carrying an aluminum medical case. It was Dr. Keller. The puzzle pieces were rapidly sliding into their fatal positions. They moved through the basement with practiced ease, treating my home like their own personal headquarters. I switched the primary audio feed to the camera hidden beneath my office desk. The wide-angle lens captured the heavy mahogany doors swinging open. Monica was already waiting inside the study holding a crystal decanter of my most expensive scotch. She wore a silk robe, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the fireplace. Trent walked directly over to her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her into a passionate embrace. Dr. Keller locked the double doors behind them, placing his silver medical case onto my pristine glass coffee table with a heavy thud. The sheer audacity of their gathering made my blood run cold. They were standing in the very room where I had built my logistics empire, casually drinking my liquor while finalizing the details of my total destruction. Trent pulled away from Monica, taking a glass of scotch and raising it in a mocking toast. He praised her performance from earlier in the afternoon, laughing about how perfectly I had played the role of the confused, deteriorating old fool. Monica giggled, a sharp grating sound echoing through the hidden microphone. I forced myself to watch every second of their despicable celebration. I needed to witness the absolute depths of their depravity to eradicate any lingering trace of mercy left in my heart. Dr. Keller did not join their laughter. He remained strictly professional, his face a mask of clinical detachment. He snapped the metallic latches of his aluminum case, opening it to reveal rows of dense foam padding. Monica and Trent stopped their banter, walking over to the coffee table, their eyes gleaming with dark anticipation. Keller reached into the case and extracted a thick plastic syringe. The barrel was filled with a viscous, pale yellow fluid. He held it up to the light, expertly tapping the side of the glass to remove a tiny air bubble. The visual feed was incredibly sharp. I could clearly see the long, wicked needle reflecting the orange flames. It was the exact same needle my son had drawn in his terrifying crayon masterpiece at the motel. My chest tightened, a fierce rage flaring in my gut as I remembered Leo's trembling voice. Dr. Keller turned to my wife, his expression devoid of empathy, and handed her the loaded syringe. Monica took it with reverent care, cradling the instrument of my demise in her manicured hands. Friday morning, Keller instructed, his voice echoing cleanly through the bugged ventilation shaft. Inject this directly into his neck while he is sleeping. The compound is significantly stronger than the oral doses. It will immediately cross the blood-brain barrier and induce a permanent massive stroke. He will instantly lose all major motor functions. He will completely lose his ability to swallow, walk, and formulate speech. He will be trapped inside his failing body, but his heart will continue to beat. Monica stared at the yellow fluid, a twisted smile spreading across her face. And the legal paperwork, she asked, her voice trembling with sheer excitement. Keller reached back into his briefcase, pulling out a thick manila folder. He tossed it onto the coffee table. I have already pre-signed the psychiatric incompetence forms, he confirmed coldly. My medical evaluation definitively declares him entirely unfit to manage his own affairs. The private asylum transport is booked for 9 o'clock on Friday morning. They will wheel him out the front door, and he will never step foot in this house again. Trent wrapped his arm possessively around Monica's shoulders. Once he is locked away in the memory ward, Trent murmured, the power of attorney transfers full corporate control to us. I will liquidate the remaining commercial assets by Monday. We will drain the $85 million trust before the board of directors realizes he is permanently gone. Monica leaned against his chest, sighing with profound satisfaction. "It is absolutely brilliant," she whispered. "He gets to spend the rest of his pathetic life staring at a blank hospital wall while we spend every single penny." I sat alone in the dark guest room, the glowing light of the iPad illuminating the cold tears of pure fury streaming down my face. I had given this woman my trust and heart. I had elevated Trent to a millionaire executive. I had paid Dr. Keller a massive retainer. In return, they colluded to erase my humanity. The magnitude of their evil was breathtaking, but it was also their ultimate downfall. They had accounted for every medical symptom and legal loophole, but they completely failed to account for a father protecting his only son. I reached out, pressing the save button on the iPad screen. The encrypted offshore server locked the high-definition video and audio recording into an impenetrable digital vault. I had proof of their conspiracy to commit attempted murder and corporate sabotage. I powered down the screen, plunging it into silent darkness. I closed my eyes, visualizing the digital tripwires Mitchell had coded into the banking system. When Friday morning arrived, Monica would not find a helpless victim. Trent would not find an open vault. The game of chess was officially over. They advanced their pieces, believing they cornered the king, but they were blind to the board. I stood up from the mattress, feeling a triumphant calm settle in my soul, ready to spring the trap and watch them burn. I sank back onto the edge of the mattress, my eyes glued to the glowing screen of the tablet. The digital tripwires were firmly set, but the night was not over. Downstairs in the study, Dr. Keller packed his aluminum case with clinical precision. His part in the grim conspiracy concluded for the evening. He offered a curt nod to Trent, entirely ignoring Monica, and let himself out through the heavy oak doors. I listened to his footsteps recede down the hallway, leaving the two lovers alone in the flickering firelight of my office. Trent walked over to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself another generous measure of my vintage scotch. He took a long sip, his shoulders relaxing, as if the massive weight of the world had just been lifted from them. He turned back to Monica, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. "You have handled the medical side flawlessly," Trent murmured, stepping closer to her. "The legal documents are completely ironclad. The bank transfers are ready to execute the second the conservatorship is approved by the judge. But there is still one massive loose end we have not completely finalized." Monica tilted her head, her dark hair cascading over her silk robe. She looked at him with an expression of mild amusement, entirely unfazed by the gravity of their actions. "What loose end?" she asked, her voice light and musical. Trent lowered his glass, his expression turning serious. "The kid Monica. Leo. What exactly are we doing with the boy? We cannot just keep him in the house while his father is suddenly dragged out on a stretcher by psychiatric order. People ask questions. Teachers notice things. The kid is incredibly perceptive. He already stares at me like he knows I do not belong here." A sharp melodic laugh escaped Monica's lips. The sound echoed through the hidden audio receiver, striking my ears like shattering glass. It was a laugh utterly devoid of maternal warmth, completely empty of any human empathy. It was the sound of a predator perfectly comfortable with its own cruelty. "Oh, Trent," she sighed, waving her hand dismissively. "You worry entirely too much about the small details. I have already taken care of my darling little stepson. The kid knows entirely too much anyway. He has been whining and asking too many questions about why his father is always tired. I cannot have a bratty 8-year-old boy running around telling the neighborhood busybodies that his mother is feeding his father strange blue pills." Trent stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. "So what is the exact play here?" he asked, leaning against the edge of the heavy mahogany desk. Monica walked over to my desk, running her fingers lightly across the polished surface. "I have spent the last 3 weeks arranging a very special educational opportunity for Leo," she explained smoothly. "I found a highly exclusive, entirely unregulated disciplinary boarding school. It is located on a remote island down in the Caribbean, miles away from any prying American authorities. They specialize in troubled, wealthy children whose parents require absolute discretion. Trent raised an eyebrow, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Disciplinary school. That sounds rather severe for a kid who just likes to draw in his coloring books. Monica turned to face him, her eyes shining with malicious delight. The funding I wired them from your untraceable accounts covers their premium isolation package. We ship him out on a private charter plane this Sunday morning. The school guarantees absolutely no outside contact. No phone calls, no letters, no weekend visits. They keep him completely locked away on that island, subjected to their strict behavioral modification programs until he turns 18 years old. The sheer horror of her words washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. My breath hitched in my throat, trapped by a paralyzing wave of utter disbelief. Trent chuckled, raising his glass to Monica in a silent salute. 10 years, Trent calculated aloud, a greedy glint in his eyes. He will be down there for an entire decade. Monica nodded eagerly. Exactly. By the time that brat is legally allowed to walk out of those rusted gates, the entire $85 million trust will be ours. We will be living in the south of France, completely untraceable. And your pathetic, useless husband Trent asked, his voice dripping with absolute venom. Monica smiled, a terrifying, empty expression that chilled my soul. The old man will be completely forgotten, she whispered. He will be rotting away in a padded cell wearing a hospital gown, unable to speak, unable to walk, and unable to remember his own name. He will die a drooling vegetable, and we will inherit the earth. I stared at the tablet, my vision blurring, as the true depth of their malevolence fully registered in my mind. They were not merely satisfied with destroying my physical body and stealing my hard-earned wealth. They were actively planning to condemn an innocent, bright 8-year-old boy to an offshore nightmare. They were going to strip him from his home, throw him onto a plane, and abandon him in a foreign prison camp for troubled youths. They were going to steal a decade of his life, breaking his spirit, in a facility designed to crush children into submission, all to ensure he could never challenge their theft. The profound grief of a broken marriage, the lingering sadness of a betrayed husband, evaporated instantly. It was completely obliterated, replaced by a lethal, white-hot, calculated rage. My hands stopped trembling entirely. The lingering weakness from the chemical poison was entirely gone, overridden by the purest, most concentrated surge of adrenaline I had ever experienced in my entire life. I was a father, listening to monsters casually discuss the brutal imprisonment of my only child. I slowly stood up from the bed, my muscles coiled tightly with dangerous energy. I had spent my entire life negotiating corporate mergers, playing political games, and compromising for the sake of peace. But there would be absolutely no negotiations here. There would be no compromises. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire existence. I was going to tear down the artificial reality they had built brick by brick until they had absolutely nowhere left to hide. I looked at the screen one last time. Trent pulled Monica into an embrace, whispering promises of stolen wealth into her ear. They believed they were architects of the perfect crime. They thought Friday would be their victory. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They awoke a fury they could never comprehend. I powered down the tablet, plunging the silent room into total darkness. The plan was not just about preserving my company or my life. It was about absolute, unmitigated retribution. I walked over to the window, staring out at the dark, sprawling grounds of my estate. The night was absolutely quiet, holding its breath right before the coming storm. Let them enjoy their scotch. Let them dream of their stolen millions and their French villas. Tomorrow the sun would rise and the clueless old man they sought to destroy would orchestrate their absolute, inescapable ruin. Thursday morning broke with a dull light filtering through the curtains. I lay perfectly still in the massive bed, listening to the soft breathing of the woman lying next to me. The woman who intended to drive a needle into my neck in less than 24 hours. Every instinct screamed at me to grab her by the throat, to demand answers for the wickedness she brought into my home. But I forced my heart rate to remain steady. I had to bury the betrayed husband and summon the broken old man. The digital tripwires were set. The hidden cameras were capturing every shadow. Now I needed to hand them the exact bait they had been greedily circling for 6 months. I needed them to bring the final legal documents right into my hands. I waited until Monica slipped out of the sheets and walked into the adjoining master bathroom to begin her morning routine. I gave her exactly 5 minutes. Then I initiated the performance. I threw the heavy duvet off my body and stumbled out of bed, purposely tangling my feet in the fabric. I let out a panicked gasp and allowed my knees to buckle. I crashed onto the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. I knocked over the oak nightstand, sending the water glass and lamp shattering against the floorboards. The noise was deafening in the quiet morning air. I curled my body into a tight ball, pulling my knees to my chest, and forced my breathing into rapid, shallow gasps. I began to weep. It was not entirely fake. I channeled every ounce of terror I had felt watching my little boy draw that cage, and I let it pour out of me in pathetic sobs. The bathroom door flew open. Monica rushed out, her hair wrapped in a towel, her face a flawless mask of artificial alarm. "Harrison," she cried out, dropping to her knees beside me on the floor. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I squeezed my eyes shut, rocking back and forth, clutching the sides of my head with trembling hands. "I cannot remember," I wailed, letting my voice crack with absolute fear. "I cannot remember anything, Monica." I woke up and I did not know where I was. The room was spinning. The numbers, all the numbers in my head, they are completely gone. I grabbed her arm, digging my fingers into her sleeve. "My mind is slipping away, Monica. It is like a dark fog is eating my brain. I cannot think. I am losing everything." She wrapped her arms around my shaking shoulders, pulling my head against her chest. I could feel the steady beat of her heart. She was not panicked. She was thrilled. "Shh, it is all right, my sweet husband," she murmured, stroking my hair with a chilling detachment. "Dr. Keller warned us that these episodes would start happening more frequently. You are just having a severe confused state. You need to breathe. Just let me take care of you." I pushed back slightly, looking up with wide, terrified eyes. "The company," I gasped frantically, shaking my head. "The company is going to completely collapse." I tried to mentally review the quarterly logistics reports last night, and it was just blank paper. The letters were floating. "I cannot lead them anymore, Monica. I am going to ruin our family because my brain is actively dying." I let out another terrible, gut-wrenching sob. "I need you to help me," I begged, my voice muffled by my trembling fingers. "I need to protect the assets before I lose my grip on reality." I looked at her, projecting total surrender. "Call Trent Lawson right now. He is the only one who understands the financial infrastructure. He has to take the reins permanently. I need you to call Mitchell Reynolds, too. Tell my lawyer to draft a total comprehensive power of attorney immediately. I want to sign everything over to Trent and to you. I need to do it before the fog takes me completely." I kept my eyes wide and pleading. "Call them, Monica," I pleaded, my voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Tell Mitchell to bypass all standard waiting periods. Tell him I demand an emergency corporate signing by tomorrow morning at the absolute latest. Friday morning, before I forget my own name. I cannot bear the thought of destroying my life work. Please, my love, save me from myself. Give Trent the legal authority to run the empire. Give yourself the power to manage the money." Monica stared down at me. The performance was working perfectly. Through the sheer terror I was projecting, I watched the subtle shifts in her facial expressions. She tried desperately to maintain the sorrowful frown of a devoted caretaker, but the magnitude of her greed was too powerful to conceal. A brilliant, triumphant spark ignited deep within her dark eyes. The muscles around her mouth twitched as she fought back a victorious smile. She thought her toxic blue pills had finally broken my spirit, fracturing my cognitive defenses so thoroughly that I was willingly handing her the keys to an $85 million kingdom. "Oh, Harrison," she whispered, her voice vibrating with suppressed excitement. "Are you absolutely sure about this? Giving up total legal control is a very monumental decision." I let my head loll back against her arm, closing my eyes in a display of utter defeat. "I have no other choice," I mumbled weakly. "I am broken, Monica. The man who built that logistics empire is completely gone. I trust you. I trust Trent. Please promise me you will arrange the emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Promise me you will bring the legal papers here so I can sign them in my study." She gently kissed my forehead, her lips feeling like ice against my skin. "I promise, my sweet husband," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy and genuine malice. "I will call Trent and your attorney the second I get you back into bed. I will make sure Mitchell drafts an ironclad power of attorney document. We will handle everything right here in the study tomorrow morning at 8 in the morning. Trent and I will completely take over and you can finally just sleep." I nodded slowly, allowing her to help me up from the shattered debris. I leaned all my weight against her slight frame as we shuffled slowly back toward the massive bed. She tucked the heavy duvet under my chin. "Rest now, Harrison," she whispered softly. "Tomorrow will be a completely new day." She turned and walked briskly out of the master bedroom, pulling her cell phone from her pocket before she crossed the threshold. I lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling. I had just handed them the ultimate bait, and they swallowed it whole. They believed Friday morning would be a simple corporate handover, followed by a lethal injection and a private ambulance ride to an asylum. They had absolutely no idea that Mitchell was armed with a digital arsenal, and every word spoken was recorded. The trap was locked. The countdown to their absolute devastation had officially begun. The digital clock on my bedside table glowed crimson, marking 2 in the morning. Monica was deeply asleep beside me, dreaming of the wealth she believed she would inherit. I slid out from beneath the heavy duvet with the practiced silence of a ghost. I dressed quickly in dark clothing, moving through the bedroom without making a sound. I navigated the dark hallway, bypassing the microscopic cameras Victor's men had installed, making my way to the playroom, where my son was sleeping on a small cot. I gently placed my hand over Leo's mouth to prevent any sudden outcry and whispered his name. His eyes fluttered open wide with immediate fear, but the panic dissolved the second he recognized my face in the dim light. I pressed a finger to my lips, signaling absolute silence. He nodded, a brave soldier in a war he barely understood. I helped him put on his sneakers and grabbed the canvas backpack. I took his hand and together we moved like shadows down the back staircase and out the contractor door. I secured Leo in the back seat of my SUV, leaving the headlights off, as I let the vehicle roll silently down the driveway before engaging the engine. I drove us into the rural outskirts of Columbus, navigating deserted backroads until we reached a sprawling, abandoned industrial park. A large matte black tactical vehicle was parked in the deep shadows of a loading dock. As I pulled up alongside it, Victor stepped out. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face an unreadable mask of professional stone radiating an aura of absolute security. Flanking him were 2 men in tactical gear. I killed the engine and stepped out into the humid night, opening the rear door for my son. I reached into the trunk and pulled out a heavy leather duffel bag. I handed it directly to Victor. Inside was $250,000 in untraceable cash, Leo Wo's authentic passport, and a comprehensive set of emergency medical and legal documents granting Victor absolute guardianship. Victor knew the stakes. He took the bag, his grip ironclad. "He is going to a fortified subterranean safe house across state lines," Victor stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "It is off the grid, equipped with independent power and a dedicated security detail. He will be treated like a highly protected dignitary until you give the absolute all clear." I nodded, feeling a profound wave of relief wash over my exhausted soul. I turned back to Leo. He was standing small and fragile against the massive tires of my vehicle, clutching his canvas backpack to his chest. The sheer cruelty of Monica's plan, her intention to ship this innocent boy to a brutal offshore prison in the Caribbean, flared violently in my mind. I dropped to both knees on the cracked asphalt, bringing myself perfectly level with his frightened eyes. I pulled him into my arms, wrapping him in an embrace so tight, I hoped it would shield him from the entire world. I buried my face in his shoulder. "Listen to me carefully, Leo," I whispered, keeping my voice steady to project the strength he desperately needed. "You are going to go with Victor now. He is a good man, and he is going to keep you incredibly safe. You will have television, video games, and whatever food you want. But you must stay inside the house, and you must do exactly what Victor's men tell you to do." Leo pulled back slightly, his lower lip trembling as a single tear escaped his eye. "Are you going to be okay, Dad?" he asked, his voice cracking with pure innocence. I looked him directly in the eye, letting the absolute certainty of my vengeance shine through. "The bad people are never going to touch us again, Leo." I promised him, my words carrying the weight of a sacred vow. "I am going to make sure the monsters are completely gone by the time I come to bring you home. You are my entire world, and I will burn the earth to the ground before I let anyone take you away from me. Be brave for me just a little while longer." "I love you, Dad," he said softly. "I love you too." Victor placed a massive protective hand on Leo's shoulder, guiding him toward the armored rear door of the tactical vehicle. I watched as my son climbed inside the heavy door, slamming shut with a resounding metallic thud that finalized the separation. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl that echoed off the empty brick warehouses. I stood completely still on the broken asphalt, watching the red taillights fade into the consuming darkness until they vanished entirely. The anchor weighing down my heart was completely lifted. The sole vulnerability that Monica and Trent could have exploited was securely locked away. I returned to my SUV, gripping the steering wheel with a terrifying absolute calmness. The drive back to the sprawling estate was a surreal journey. The man who had left the house an hour ago was a desperate father trying to secure his bloodline. The man returning was a cold, calculating executioner. I pulled through the towering iron gates, parking the vehicle silently in the massive garage. I bypassed the main living areas, moving through the dark, silent corridors like a shadow. The house had become a meticulously constructed execution chamber. I walked into my dark study, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a definitive click. I did not turn on the desk lamp. I did not activate the encrypted iPad to check the hidden surveillance feeds. I knew exactly where the enemy was sleeping. I navigated the pitch-black room entirely by memory, moving slowly toward the large leather armchair positioned behind my massive mahogany desk. I sank into the soft leather, feeling the familiar contours of the seat of power I had occupied for 3 decades. I rested my hands flat on the polished wood of the desk, staring intently at the locked double doors leading out to the hallway. Dawn was only a few hours away. In a few hours, the sun would rise over the Ohio suburbs. Monica would wake up, fix her hair, and prepare the deadly syringe Dr. Keller had handed her. She would walk into this very room with Trent Lawson by her side, expecting to find a broken, drooling vegetable ready to sign away an $85 million empire. They expected a surrender. I sat in the consuming darkness, my breathing slow, shallow, and completely controlled. I was completely stripped of any remaining mercy, empathy, or hesitation. The grief of a failed marriage was utterly incinerated by the sheer magnitude of their betrayal. The profound humiliation of playing the stumbling victim was replaced by the intoxicating anticipation of their impending destruction. I watched the thin sliver of moonlight slowly track across the expensive Persian rug, marking the steady passage of time. Let the morning come. Let the 2 arrogant traitors finally walk through those heavy doors to meet their fate. I was the executioner waiting in silence to deliver absolute devastation. The absolute silence of the estate was broken by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of my study. It was precisely 4 in the morning. The darkness outside my window was beginning to soften, shifting to a bruised purple. I had not slept a single second. My mind was racing with terrifying clarity, processing the intricate variables required to execute the final maneuver. I pushed myself up from the heavy leather armchair, my joints stiff from sitting motionless, but my spirit completely reinvigorated. The time for passive observation was over. It was time to forge the iron bars of the cage Monica and Trent had built for themselves. I walked to the mahogany desk and pulled the encrypted burner phone from my pocket. I dialed Mitchell Reynolds, my oldest friend and most trusted attorney. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and alert. I told him the child was safe, securely transported across state lines with Victor's team. I heard Mitchell release a heavy sigh of profound relief. With Leo removed from the blast radius, Mitchell stated, "We are officially clear to initiate the federal protocol. Are you absolutely prepared to hand over the digital vault, Harrison?" I looked around the room where Trent had casually plotted my murder just hours earlier and told Mitchell to patch them through. A brief series of electronic clicks was followed by a secure routing tone. A new voice entered the line. It was deep and strictly professional. "Mr. Caldwell," the voice said, "I am Special Agent Thomas with the Federal Financial Crimes Division. Attorney Reynolds has fully briefed us on your situation. We need you to authorize the transfer of the remote server data to our secure servers." I tapped the screen of my iPad, authorizing the complex transfer protocols Victor's technicians had established. "I am releasing the encrypted files to you now, Agent Thomas," I replied. "You will find comprehensive documentation of massive wire fraud, illegal offshore banking, and systemic corporate embezzlement orchestrated by my Chief Financial Officer, Trent Lawson." I paused, letting the silence hang on the line for a crucial second. "But that is not the primary reason you need to mobilize your agents this morning." I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "If you open the file labeled Midnight Study, you will find high-definition video and crystal-clear audio recorded inside my home just 3 hours ago. You will hear my wife and my executive finalizing a conspiracy to commit attempted murder. They are actively planning to inject me with a lethal neurotoxin at 8 o'clock this morning to induce a permanent massive stroke. They also explicitly detailed their immediate plan to kidnap my 8-year-old son and illegally traffic him to an unregulated prison camp in the Caribbean to secure their financial takeover." I heard the frantic clicking of keyboards in the background as the federal agents rapidly accessed the secure video files. There was a tense silence on the line as Special Agent Thomas and his team absorbed the sheer horror of the midnight meeting. When Thomas spoke again, his professional detachment was gone, replaced by the grim tone of an officer confronting absolute evil. "Mr. Caldwell," Thomas said, his voice tightly controlled, "we have visual confirmation of the lethal syringe and direct audio admission of premeditated violent felonies. This has escalated from a financial investigation to an active hostage and homicide intervention. We are mobilizing a full tactical response unit immediately." Mitchell interjected, his legal mind working rapidly. "Agent Thomas, they expect Harrison to be completely incapacitated and compliant at 8 o'clock when they present the fraudulent power of attorney documents. If you breach the front doors too early, they will panic, destroy the physical evidence, and claim it was a simple medical misunderstanding. We need them to commit to the act. We need them to place the weapon on the table and present the fraudulent documents. Only then can we guarantee they spend the rest of their miserable lives rotting in a federal penitentiary." "I agree with your attorney," Agent Thomas replied. "Mr. Caldwell, we are going to silently lock down your entire property. You will have a heavily armed tactical team positioned completely out of sight. You need to let them enter the study. You need to let them present the forged legal documents. Do not let them administer the injection. The second the syringe is physically exposed, you will give us the verbal signal. You will say the word checkmate, and we will breach the room in under 4 seconds. Do you understand the parameters of this operation, sir?" I gripped the burner phone tightly, staring at the locked double doors. "I understand completely," I replied. "I will hold the line. The call disconnected, leaving me alone in the quiet house. The sun began to crest over the distant tree horizon, casting long rays of cold morning light through the tall windows. At exactly 6 in the morning, the silent invasion began. It was a masterpiece of federal coordination. A fleet of ordinary vehicles slowly filtered into the neighborhood. 2 unmarked utility vans parked quietly at the far edge of my property line, blending perfectly into the suburban landscape. A generic landscaping truck pulled onto the neighboring empty lot, its engine cutting off silently. Through the dense tree line, I could barely make out the dark silhouettes of armed federal agents systematically surrounding the outer perimeter of my sprawling estate. They moved with terrifying efficiency, utilizing the natural shadows and the morning mist to remain completely invisible. They secured the rear exits boxed in the main driveway and positioned tactical snipers in the foliage overlooking the massive windows of my study. The Ohio fortress I had built to keep my family safe was now a flawless, inescapable federal trap, and the oblivious targets were waking up right upstairs. I turned away from the window as the first sounds of life began to echo through the large house. I heard the distant sound of the shower running in the master bathroom. Monica was washing away her sleep, eagerly preparing herself for the morning she truly believed would make her an incredibly wealthy multimillionaire widow. I walked over to the small mirror hanging near the bookshelves and looked at my reflection. I had to entirely bury the calculated executioner and perfectly resurrect the frail, terrified old man for one final flawless performance. I deliberately ruffled my hair with both hands, letting it stand at wild, chaotic angles around my face. I loosened my collar, allowing my shoulders to slump heavily forward. I practiced the vacant, terrified stare, the slight tremor in the jaw, the pathetic shuffle of a man whose mind was actively dissolving into nothingness. The physical transformation was deeply sickening, but it was the necessary armor for the final battle. I heard the rhythmic clicking of Monica's expensive heels descending the grand marble staircase. The executioners were gathering in the kitchen, preparing their poison, completely unaware that they were already surrounded by ghosts. I unlocked the heavy oak doors of the study, leaving them slightly ajar, and sank deeply into my leather armchair to wait. The grandfather clock in the corner of my study chimed exactly 8 times. Each heavy resonant strike echoed loudly through the quiet house, signaling the exact arrival of my executioners. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors pushed open. Trent Lawson walked into the room first. He was dressed in a sharp-tailored charcoal suit, projecting the absolute confidence of a corporate conqueror finally taking his rightful throne. His chest was puffed out, his chin held high, radiating an arrogant entitlement that made my stomach churn with disgust. Behind him followed Dr. Keller, carrying that same sleek aluminum medical case, his face completely devoid of any medical empathy or basic human decency. Next came a nervous-looking man with thinning hair clutching a thick leather briefcase to his chest. This was undoubtedly the corrupt notary they had purchased to finalize the illegal transaction, a pathetic pawn willing to facilitate a massive corporate theft for a slice of the pie. And finally, Monica. My treacherous wife glided into the study wearing a pristine white dress, looking like an absolute angel of mercy. Her expensive designer purse hung heavily from her shoulder, and she kept her right hand securely tucked inside it. I knew exactly what she was gripping. I remained slumped in my leather armchair, letting a string of pathetic, confused whimpers escape my throat. I looked at the 4 of them with wide, terrified eyes, darting my gaze around the room as if I no longer recognized my own sanctuary. Trent approached my massive mahogany desk, slapping a thick stack of legal papers onto the polished surface. There were at least 30 pages of comprehensive asset transfer documents spread out before me. The bold black lettering at the top of the very first page read, "Total Durable Power of Attorney and Medical Conservatorship." The sheer volume of the paperwork was staggering, outlining a complete transfer of power. It was the absolute surrender of my life, my freedom, and my $85 million logistics empire. The nervous notary quickly unpacked his official stamps, his hands shaking slightly as he arranged the pages for my signature. He avoided making any direct eye contact with me, keeping his gaze firmly fixed on the polished wood. He was fully aware that he was actively participating in a massive, highly illegal corporate hijacking, and his cowardice was palpable. I stared down at the documents, feeling a profound disgust for the sheer clinical efficiency of their betrayal. Dr. Keller stepped forward, placing his metal case right next to the legal documents on the edge of my desk. He snapped the latches open with a sharp metallic click that sent a genuine chill down my spine. I saw the pale yellow fluid inside the plastic syringe resting securely in the dense foam padding. He did not remove it yet. He was keeping it ready, a silent, lethal threat hovering over the entire transaction. The implication was painfully clear. If I signed the papers, I would receive the injection quietly in my bed. If I resisted, the injection would be forced upon me right here in this room. The cold reality of their plan hung heavily in the air. Monica walked slowly around the desk, standing directly beside my chair. She smelled of vanilla and morning coffee, a sickening contrast to the murderous intent radiating from her cold soul. She leaned down, bringing her face close to mine. Her right hand remained buried deep inside her purse, her knuckles visibly white through the expensive leather. She had a secondary syringe ready in case the doctor hesitated, or in case I suddenly found the strength to violently fight back. "Harrison, my sweet husband," Monica whispered, her voice dripping with artificial honey and perfectly feigned sorrow. "The men are here just like you requested yesterday. Trent brought the papers to protect the company, and Dr. Keller is here to give you a special vitamin injection to help clear the terrible fog in your brain. You just need to sign your name on the dotted lines, and then you can finally go to sleep." I let my jaw tremble, forcing my breathing to become rapid and erratic. I felt a deep surge of loathing. I looked down at the 30 pages of my own destruction. I slowly reached out my fingers, hovering over the heavy gold fountain pen resting on the desk. I picked it up, putting on the performance of a lifetime. I forced my hand to shake violently. The gold pen rattled aggressively against the thick paper, leaving erratic, jagged ink marks entirely outside the designated signature boxes. I let out a sharp, frustrated cry, pretending that I lacked the basic motor skills to even write my own name. I looked up at Trent, projecting complete pathetic helplessness, tears of fake frustration pooling in my eyes. Trent smirked, a look of pure disgust flashing across his face. He crossed his arms, looking down at me as if I were a diseased animal. "Just guide his hand," Monica Trent ordered coldly, dropping the facade of the concerned colleague entirely. "We do not have all morning to watch him fumble with a pen." Monica stepped closer, the suffocating scent of her perfume making me physically nauseous. She placed her left hand firmly over my violently shaking right hand, gripping my fingers tightly around the heavy gold pen. She leaned down, bringing her mouth right next to my ear, her breath hot against my skin. "Just sign it, darling," Monica whispered, her voice shifting from a sweet coo to a chilling, venomous hiss. "I will take care of you and Leo forever." The absolute arrogance of her lie was staggering. The explicit mention of the name of my son was the ultimate catalyst. Hearing her weaponize Leo, knowing her true demonic plan to ship him to a Caribbean prison camp, sent a lethal, freezing calm washings over my entire body. I stopped shaking completely. My hand became perfectly still beneath hers. The pathetic, confused old man vanished instantly, entirely replaced by the ruthless corporate executioner. I slowly lifted my head, turning my face to look directly into her eyes. The artificial sweetness on her face faltered for a fraction of a second as she registered the sudden, terrifying shift in my demeanor. The trembling was gone. The confusion was gone. My eyes were cold, sharp, and entirely focused. I let the pen slip from my fingers, letting it clatter onto the 30 pages of fraudulent documents. I was no longer a victim trapped in a failing body. I was a father defending his bloodline, and I was about to unleash a firestorm they could never possibly comprehend. I stared deeply into the widening eyes of Monica, watching the first terrifying seeds of doubt begin to sprout in her mind. She tightened her grip on the hidden syringe inside her purse, but it was already far too late. The invisible Federal agents were closely listening, and the trap was perfectly set. The final move was mine. I took a deep, steady breath, preparing to speak the single word that would shatter her false reality and bring the walls crashing down upon them. "Checkmate," I said. The word hung in the heavy air of the study, a single sharp syllable that sliced through the suffocating tension. I let the heavy gold fountain pen slip completely from my grasp. It hit the polished mahogany surface of the desk with a sharp clatter, rolling over the thick stack of fraudulent asset transfer documents. The violent, pathetic tremor in my right hand vanished instantly. I slowly pulled my shoulders back, feeling my spine straighten and align, shedding the frail posture of the dying man I had so meticulously portrayed for the past 48 hours. I took a deep, commanding breath, filling my lungs with a revitalized strength that felt entirely foreign after days of chemical suppression. I looked directly into Monica's dark eyes. The transition was immediate and absolute. The confused, cloudy gaze of a dementia patient was entirely replaced by the cold, calculating stare of a man who had spent 3 decades destroying corporate rivals. Monica recoiled as if she had been physically struck. Her perfectly manicured hand, the one that had been forcefully guiding mine just a second before, jerked back in sudden horror. The mask of the doting, sorrowful wife shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her jaw went slack, and a flicker of pure, unadulterated terror danced across her face. She took a clumsy step backward, her expensive heels scraping awkwardly against the Persian rug. Her right hand remained buried deep inside her designer purse, her knuckles surely white as she maintained her desperate grip on the hidden syringe. She opened her mouth to speak, to perhaps weave another layer of deception, but the words completely failed her. "You do not have to worry about taking care of us, Monica," I stated. My voice was no longer a raspy, weak whisper. It was lethal, steady, and resonated with an absolute, undeniable authority that commanded the entire room. "Because the Federal Bureau of Prisons will be taking care of you." The air in the Grand Library grew instantly frigid. Trent Lawson, who had been leaning arrogantly against the edge of the desk, suddenly stood up straight. His smug expression evaporated, replaced by a deep, dawning realization that the ground beneath his feet was rapidly giving way. He looked from the abandoned gold pen to my steady hands, and finally to the completely coherent, furious expression on my face. The reality of the situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. He realized with absolute clarity that I was not a broken old man and that their flawless master plan had been compromised. Harrison Trent stammered, his voice tight and unnaturally high. "What kind of sick joke is this? You are confused. You are having a medical episode. You need to sit back down before you hurt yourself." He took a threatening step forward, attempting to reclaim the physical dominance he thought he possessed over me. He was still desperately clinging to the illusion, refusing to accept that the chessboard had been flipped. I did not move a single muscle. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked on his, radiating a quiet, dangerous confidence. I reached my right hand slowly underneath the thick edge of the mahogany desk, my fingers tracing the smooth wood, until they found the small concealed security button Mitchell had installed years ago for emergency lockdown procedures. I pressed it firmly. A heavy metallic thud echoed through the Grand Library. The electronic deadbolts on the massive oak double doors engaged simultaneously, sealing the exits with absolute finality. The sound was like a jail cell slamming shut. The corrupt notary, who had been sweating profusely in his chair, jumped up in sheer panic. He scrambled toward the doors, frantically twisting the brass handles, but they were entirely immobile. "We are locked in," the notary squeaked, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He backed away from the doors, clutching his leather briefcase against his chest, as if it could somehow protect him from the impending disaster. Dr. Keller finally reacted. He abandoned his clinical detachment, his eyes darting frantically toward the aluminum medical case resting on the glass coffee table. He took a quick step toward it, his hand reaching out to secure the lethal evidence he had brought into my home. Stop exactly where you are, doctor, I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. Do not touch that case, unless you want to add tampering with evidence to the incredibly long list of federal charges you are about to face. Keller froze his hand, hovering mere inches from the metal latch. He looked at me, his medical arrogance completely dissolving into raw, primal fear. He slowly lowered his arm, stepping away from the coffee table. He finally understood the gravity of his predicament. He was a licensed medical professional, standing in a locked room with an unadministered syringe of neurotoxin, caught red-handed in a conspiracy to murder his own patient. Monica pulled her hand out of her designer purse. She was shaking now, a genuine uncontrollable tremor that mirrored the fake performance I had given just moments earlier. The hidden syringe remained safely concealed inside her bag. She knew she was trapped, but her survival instincts were still fighting for a way out. "Harrison, please," she pleaded, her voice high and erratic. "I do not understand what is happening. You are scaring me. We just want to help you. The doctor is here to help you. Trent is here to protect your company. Why are you doing this to us?" I slowly stood up from the leather armchair. I planted my feet firmly on the ground, towering over the desk. I looked at the woman who had shared my bed, the woman who had kissed my cheek while secretly feeding me poison, the woman who had callously arranged to ship my innocent 8-year-old son to an unregulated offshore prison camp in the Caribbean to secure her stolen wealth. The sheer magnitude of her evil washed over me, solidifying my resolve into impenetrable iron. "There is absolutely no fog in my mind, Monica," I declared, my words cutting through the air with surgical precision. There never was a specialized blood pressure medication. There was only a highly potent custom-compounded neuroinhibitor laced with benzodiazepines. A toxic cocktail designed to systematically shut down my cognitive pathways and simulate advanced dementia. A cocktail you personally administered to me every single day. Monica gasped, taking another step back until she collided with one of the tall bookshelves. Her face was a mask of absolute horror. She realized I knew the exact chemical makeup of the poison. The undeniable specificity of my knowledge meant her entire web of lies had been completely dismantled. "And you, Trent," I continued, turning my lethal gaze toward my former chief financial officer. "Did you honestly believe you could drain an $85 million trust fund without raising a single red flag? Did you truly think you could liquidate my commercial real estate empire while you were busy sleeping with my wife in my own house? I know about the offshore banking accounts. I know about the wire frauds. I know about the Caribbean boarding school you booked for Leo. I know every single detail of your pathetic, greedy conspiracy." Trent lunged forward, slamming his hands furiously onto the desk. "You cannot prove any of this, you crazy old fool," he yelled, spit flying from his lips. "You are a rambling dementia patient. No one is ever going to believe a single word you say. I have the medical records to prove you are entirely incompetent. We will have you committed before the sun goes down." He was clinging to the very last shred of his shattered plan, fueled by sheer, desperate adrenaline. He still believed he could somehow strong-arm his way out of the locked room and salvage the hostile takeover. I remained perfectly calm, absorbing his rage without a flinch. I let a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. "I do not need anyone to simply believe my words, Trent," I replied smoothly, "because I have spent the last 48 hours ensuring that every single corner of this estate is heavily wired with hidden surveillance equipment. I have crystal-clear, high-definition video and audio recordings of your midnight meeting in this exact room. I have the explicit conversation where you and my wife discussed injecting me with a lethal dose of neurotoxin to induce a permanent stroke. I have the recording of you plotting to kidnap my son. The federal authorities have already received the encrypted digital files. The evidence is completely out of your reach, and it is absolutely damning." The color drained entirely from Trent's face. The aggressive corporate conqueror vanished, leaving behind a terrified, desperate criminal trapped in a cage of his own making. He looked around the grand library, his eyes frantically searching the ornate ceiling and the dark corners for the invisible cameras I had just revealed. He realized the sheer magnitude of his exposure. He was completely caught. There was no clever accounting trick or legal loophole that could possibly save him from this. Before Trent could formulate a response, before Monica could attempt another pathetic plea for mercy, a series of incredibly loud, aggressive crashes erupted from the grand foyer outside the locked study doors. The heavy sounds of boots hitting the marble floor echoed through the house. The federal tactical team had finally breached the perimeter. The executioners were completely surrounded, their perfect crime spectacularly dismantled. The heavy oak doors of the Grand Library did not just open. They were violently blown apart. The deafening sound of shattering wood and splintering door frames echoed like a bomb blast through the cavernous room. A synchronized flood of heavily armed federal agents and state police poured through the breached entryway. They moved with terrifying precision, their tactical boots stomping aggressively against the expensive hardwood floors. Brilliant beams of tactical flashlights swept across the room, blinding the conspirators and pinning them like insects under a microscope. Federal Bureau of Investigation dropped to the ground. Immediately, a massive agent boomed, drowning out the terrified shrieks of my treacherous wife. Mitchell Reynolds stepped through the shattered doorway, right behind the wall of black tactical gear. My oldest friend smoothed his perfectly tailored suit jacket, his face an absolute mask of legal wrath and profound satisfaction. He surveyed the chaotic scene, his eyes lingering on the fraudulent documents scattered across my desk, and then he looked directly at me, giving a sharp, definitive nod. Before Trent or Monica could even process the reality of the armed invasion, the massive television screen mounted above the stone fireplace flickered to life. Victor had integrated the security feed into the home automation system. The screen illuminated the dark library with a crisp, high-definition broadcast of the midnight meeting. The audio was crystal clear, booming from the hidden surround sound speakers I had installed years ago. The digital playback showed Trent and Monica sitting in this exact room. Their recorded voices filled the air, callous and dripping with lethal intent. The video played the exact moment Monica demonstrated how she would administer the injection. The recording captured Dr. Keller casually explaining how the neurotoxin would mimic a massive, irreversible stroke. But the most damning piece of the broadcast was the segment concerning my son. The entire room listened as the recorded version of Monica explicitly detailed her plan to kidnap Leo and traffic him to the unregulated Caribbean facility. The sheer brutality of their own recorded words paralyzed them. Trent stared at the massive screen, his jaw hanging open, watching his entire future evaporate in high definition. The arrogant corporate conqueror was completely gone. In his place stood a pathetic, cornered criminal, realizing he would never wear a tailored suit or sit in a boardroom again. He looked toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows facing the rear gardens. Sheer, blinding panic overrode whatever rational thought he had left. He realized how the feeble old man he had so thoroughly underestimated had engineered his absolute destruction. His breathing quickly became incredibly rapid, turning into shallow, desperate gasps as his eyes wildly calculated his impossible odds. Trent lunged for the glass. He kicked over a heavy wooden chair, desperately scrambling toward what he perceived as a final avenue of escape. He never even made it halfway. A massive federal agent intercepted his path with brutal efficiency. The agent drove his shoulder directly into Trent's chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him violently into the polished hardwood floor. The impact knocked the wind out of Trent in a loud, wheezing gasp. Two more agents descended upon him instantly, driving their knees into his back and wrenching his arms behind him. The metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like the most beautiful music I had ever heard. Dr. Keller did not even attempt to run. The medical professional simply raised his trembling hands high into the air, completely surrendering to the overwhelming force. An agent shoved him roughly against the towering bookshelves, kicking his legs apart and securing his wrists tightly behind his back. The sleek aluminum case containing the lethal syringe was immediately confiscated, bagged as the primary piece of physical evidence for the attempted murder charge. The corrupt notary was weeping openly in the corner, curled into a tight ball, loudly begging for a plea deal, before anyone had even spoken a word to him. Monica was the last to fall. The absolute reality of the tactical raid, the undeniable video evidence broadcasting her evil, and the sight of her accomplices being violently subdued finally shattered her mind. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug, the pristine white fabric of her designer dress pooling around her trembling body. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, her perfect hair falling into a messy, chaotic tangle across her face. She reached out, grabbing the hem of my trousers, tears streaming down her face in thick black rivers of ruined makeup. "Harrison, please," she sobbed, her voice a desperate, hysterical wail. "You have to stop them. You have to call them off. I am your wife. We took vows, Harrison. In sickness and in health, you promised to love me. You promised to protect me. You cannot let them take me away to a prison. Please, my sweet husband, remember our life together. Remember the vows we made before God." I stood completely motionless, looking down at the pathetic creature clutching my legs. The sheer audacity of her plea invoking the very vows she had weaponized against me solidified my total lack of mercy. I reached into the breast pocket of my trousers. My fingers brushed against the small crinkling plastic Ziploc bag I had carried with me since the very first morning I discovered her betrayal. Inside the bag rested the crushed remnants of the toxic blue pill she had ground into my coffee, the chemical poison that had stolen months of my life and plunged me into a waking nightmare. I slowly pulled the plastic bag from my pocket. I looked at the powdery blue residue, a physical manifestation of her profound evil. I let the small plastic bag slip from my fingers. It fluttered down through the air, landing perfectly in the center of her lap, right against the pristine white fabric of her dress. Monica stopped screaming. She stared down at the small bag of crushed blue powder, her eyes widening in absolute terrifying comprehension. She realized I had known about the daily poison from the very beginning. She realized every single moment of my cognitive decline had been a calculated performance, a meticulous trap designed solely for this precise outcome. Her entire world collapsed into that tiny plastic bag. She finally understood the devastating truth. I was never the helpless victim she thought she could easily discard. I was the architect of her permanent ruin. I leaned down slightly, ensuring my voice was low, steady, and loud enough for only her to hear over the chaotic noise of the federal agents securing the room. "Vows are for humans, Monica." I said my words cold and heavy with absolute finality. "You are just a parasite." I turned my back on her and slowly walked directly toward Mitchell. I did not look back as the federal agents hauled my screaming wife up from the floor, snapping the heavy steel cuffs around her wrists and dragging her out of the Grand Library, out of my home, and out of my life forever. The execution was completely finished, and the estate was finally clean. I stood by the shattered oak doors of the Grand Library, watching the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers wash across the pristine walls of the foyer. The sheer scale of the federal response was breathtaking to witness. Special Agent Thomas coordinated the extraction with ruthless efficiency, ensuring the perpetrators were immediately separated and stripped of any remaining dignity. Trent Lawson was dragged down the front steps, his expensive charcoal suit torn, and ruined his face pressed against the cold gravel of the driveway, as they read him his rights. Dr. Keller followed shortly after, weeping, like a frightened child, his medical license and his freedom permanently revoked the moment the heavy steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. And then came Monica. She was practically carried by two female agents, her pristine white dress stained with the crushing reality of her absolute failure. She did not look back. She did not scream my name again. The crushing weight of federal prison had finally silenced her toxic tongue. The legal machinery moved with terrifying speed over the following weeks. Mitchell Reynolds worked flawlessly alongside the federal prosecutors, utilizing the massive mountain of encrypted video and audio files to ensure there were absolutely no plea deals and no leniency granted to any of them. The evidence was simply too overwhelming for any defense attorney to contest. Trent Lawson, Monica Caldwell, and Dr. Keller were each handed 25-year federal sentences without the possibility of early parole. They were convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder, massive wire fraud, and severe child endangerment. The corrupt notary received a solid decade behind bars for his cowardly complicity. The offshore accounts were entirely frozen by the Financial Crimes Division. The stolen funds were completely repatriated, and the massive logistical empire I had spent 3 decades building was completely purged of their toxic parasitic influence. They were securely locked away in cold concrete cells, entirely erased from the prosperous, wealthy world they had so desperately tried to steal. With the immediate physical threat permanently neutralized, I turned my entire focus toward the future. The horrific betrayal had taught me a profound and agonizing lesson about the fragility of wealth and the absolute necessity of impenetrable security. I could no longer rely on standard corporate structures or the fragile promises of ambitious individuals. I needed an absolute, unassailable fortress. I sat down with Mitchell and a hand-picked team of top-tier financial fiduciaries to completely restructure my $85 million logistics empire. We systematically dismantled the old corporate framework and transferred every single asset, every commercial property, and every liquid financial account into an ironclad, irrevocable blind trust specifically designed for Leo. I appointed a highly scrutinized board of independent fiduciaries, legally bound by the strictest federal regulations to permanently oversee the capital. The new legal framework ensured that no single individual, including myself, could ever liquidate the core assets without triggering a massive multi-tiered federal audit involving 3 separate government agencies. The wealth was entirely locked down, protected by thick layers of bureaucratic armor that no greedy executive or treacherous spouse could ever hope to penetrate. I formally stepped down from my position as the active chief executive officer, taking a quiet observational seat on the advisory board. I had spent my entire adult life fighting brutal wars in ruthless corporate boardrooms, aggressively accumulating capital and building a massive financial empire. But the empire no longer mattered to me in the same way. The only thing that truly mattered was ensuring that the innocent boy waiting for me across state lines would never have to experience the terror of physical or financial vulnerability ever again. When the legal dust had finally settled and the massive estate was completely secure, I drove my heavy SUV out of the bustling city heading toward the subterranean safe house where Victor had carefully hidden my son. The long drive felt incredibly different this time. The crushing, suffocating weight of intense anxiety and the bitter, acidic sting of intimate betrayal were completely gone, replaced by a profound, radiant sense of absolute peace. I arrived at the heavily guarded rural compound just as the golden afternoon sun began to dip toward the dense forest horizon. Victor met me at the reinforced steel gate, his dark suit perfectly pressed, despite the remote location. He did not say a single word, but the slight, deeply respectful nod he gave me spoke absolute volumes. He had done his extremely difficult job perfectly, and I had done mine. The complex, dangerous operation was a complete success. I walked slowly into the secure, fortified living area of the underground safe house. Leo was sitting on a plush leather sofa, intensely focused on a colorful video game playing on a massive flat television screen mounted to the concrete wall. I softly called his name, my voice breaking slightly with overwhelming emotion. He dropped the plastic controller instantly, his head snapping around to look at the heavy doorway. The pure, unfiltered joy that instantly illuminated his small face was the single greatest reward I could ever possibly receive in my entire lifetime. He sprinted across the wide room and threw himself violently into my open arms, burying his tearful face deep in my chest. I held him incredibly tight, closing my eyes and breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, feeling his rapid heartbeat against my own ribs. "The terrifying monsters are gone, Leo," I whispered, my voice thick with absolute undeniable relief. "They are entirely gone, and they are never, ever coming back to hurt us again. We are finally going home to live our lives in complete peace." We returned to the sprawling suburban estate, just as the vibrant evening sky transformed into a brilliant sweeping canvas of fiery orange and deep crimson clouds. The shattered library doors had been completely replaced with solid, reinforced oak. The expensive carpets had been professionally cleaned to remove every trace of the raid, and the suffocating toxic presence of Monica and Trent had been completely scrubbed from the atmosphere of the house. The massive, silent structure finally felt like a true home again, a safe sanctuary rather than a heavily monitored battlefield. I walked slowly out onto the expansive stone balcony, overlooking the meticulously manicured rear gardens, holding a warm porcelain cup of dark roast coffee in my hands. Leo stood right beside me, his small warm hand securely wrapped around my fingers, quietly, watching the vibrant sunset paint the distant horizon. The terrible, violent storm that had actively threatened to completely consume our peaceful lives was entirely over, leaving behind a profound stillness. I looked down at my brave son, feeling an incredible, overwhelming surge of absolute clarity, washing away the final remnants of the dark deception. I had spent 3 long decades foolishly believing that true power resided strictly in massive bank accounts, hostile corporate acquisitions, and the sheer volume of wealth a man could aggressively accumulate. I was wrong. True power was not found in money, social status, or towering glass office buildings. True power was found in the ruthless willingness to entirely dismantle the world to protect the innocent. Trust is the foundation of any family, but blind trust is an invitation for betrayal. When you spend your life building an empire and providing for those you love, you must never ignore the quiet alarms of your own intuition. The greatest threat rarely breaks through the front door. It smiles at you from across the dinner table. True strength is not about accumulating wealth or surviving the corporate battlefield. It is the ruthless, unyielding courage to face the ugly truth, to protect the innocent, and to burn down the very life you built, if it means saving your child. Have you ever ignored a gut feeling only to discover you were right all along? Share your story in the comments below right now. If Harrison's fight for his son resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories of survival, dark betrayal, and ultimate justice.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battle, she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.